to teach the love because I was always punished as a kid, and I always felt really disrespected, and I was always getting in trouble, and I wanted to change that. I don't want to tell anybody how to parent. I just want to help adults understand kids and kids be able to trust adults.
Welcome to our webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Lori Petro. I am the founder of Teach Through Love, so welcome if this is your first time with me. Amy from Parenting Beyond Punishment is hosting this wonderful month-long event, the No Spank Challenge, so I'm honored to be part of it and be here with you guys. Thank you for taking the time out of your day. Amy, are you with us?
Can you hear me?
There you are.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Hi.
Hi.
I would put it on the video if I knew how, but I don't see the button. But hi, Lori. Thank you so much for having me today.
Quite welcome. Thank you for hosting. Did you? I did this whole introduction. I was talking and I had it muted. Did you notice that?
I saw it and I was like, oh no, I plugged something in wrong and I can't hear her.
I think we were talking about all those crazy technical difficulties. And look, I have right here on my notes, unpause screen share, but I don't have unmute myself. So there I go. My to-do list just got a little bit longer. Amy, what have you got coming up for the rest of the week? Or well, actually, this is Friday, so next week. Do you want to share that with anybody before we get shot?
Yes,
started?
I would love to.
Cool.
Actually, other than the emails and the discussion groups going on, we have a discussion group going on about understanding behavior in the brain, which will be great right in there along with what Lori's going to talk about today some. And then on Thursday, we have our second Positive Discipline and Everyday Parenting group. And so that's really exciting. We're going to have, of course, Robin Peters-Bennett is going to join me again as a co-host. And we're going to have 3 special guest educators join us to have a discussion. So if y'all want to come join us, we would love to have you. And you can sign up on my website or go to our Facebook page.
Yep, sign up there. And I noticed some people are signing up for the events, but you definitely want to join the Facebook group too, because there's that's where you guys can all connect, where the conversations can continue, because obviously we can only do so much in, an hour and a half every day. And then we want to talk more because this is stuff that we could, the conversations could continue for so long. So if you guys get in the groups, it's a way to continue that connection and stay supported as well. So you ready to get started?
Definitely.
Oh,
yeah.
there you are.
Sorry, I have to remember to unmute myself.
Awesome.
Yes.
Okay, well then let's do it, you guys. Let's just go ahead and get started. Of course, this is recorded, so if you have to jump off or even jump off and on, feel free to do that, but we will send the replay to everybody, and we will do a little Q&A. I think the way we'll do this is we'll go through the content, and then we'll do a Q&A at the end. Again, thank you all for being here. I think that the reason that you're here is because you've decided that you want something different in your relationship with your kids. I feel like anyone who finds their way to a parenting class in general, for whatever reason, is searching for a new way. And I think we may come to that, the decision at first thinking, how do I get my kids to listen? How do I get them to do what I need? But ultimately, I think we all come to that place of, I really want to have a good relationship with my child. It's not about, ultimately, yes, we want to raise these confident, able children. I loved what you guys were talking about in your webinar yesterday about, what's that long-term goal that I have? And the short-term goals are very different often. And when we focus on the long-term, it helps us shift. It helps us shift into consciousness because nothing else can do it, you guys, except a choice. I say in every one of my videos that I do, it's not about perfection, it's about being conscious, because it's so much about just making that decision of what kind of a relationship do I want to create with my child. And I think for all of us, the ultimate goal is to move from this stressed place of parenting from fear, of punishing, of threatening, of spiraling through our words with legitimizing our requests and trying to reason and throw logic and make our kids get it and understand. We want to move out of that because it feels like, just like these photos up on the screen, it feels like we are, locked to the wall, like our kids have us all tied up. or they feel tied up in stress, or we're disconnecting them. We're sending them away and they're mad and they're shutting down. And that's what that old stuff does, that old paradigm belief that we have that comes from a place of survival. It was from necessity and from perhaps not having that knowledge always. But now it's time for growth. I think we all want to move to that place of growth where we have connection. It doesn't mean that we get rid of conflict, but that we know how to say, I can look at you and understand that we don't agree, but we have different ideas, but you're not to blame for my feelings. You're not making me angry. You know, we often use that as a sort of knee-jerk reaction. You're making me so angry. And then our kids go around expecting the world to change. You know, when we expect our kids to change so that we feel better, so that we don't get angry, if you would just behave, then we send that message that that's how you feel better. You go around asking people to change. So I congratulate all of you just, you know, for taking the time to be here and for looking at this differently. And that's what we really have to do. We have to, I want to expose a couple of myths before we get really into the good stuff. And that is because believing these myths is what trips us up. There's so much parenting judgment and advice and things out there. And I think we want to get to a place where we feel confident in what we're doing and not like we're, oh, that's, you know, my kids aren't changing fast enough, so this can't be working. I think we have this. So the three myths are, the first one is that I must be firm and address behavior so that my child, you know, will respect me and listen and know. You know, so it's this idea that we have to be firm and address behavior. And the second myth is that I must show my child who's in charge. I'm in charge. I'm the parent. They need to know that. They got to show them that. That's the next myth. And then the last myth is that I must teach my child to be appropriate, to act appropriate, to be things, to be kind, to be this way, to be polite. These are myths, because the fact is, you guys, is that your kids already know that you're in charge, right? That's actually addressing the second myth. Let's address the first one. The first one, that I have to address behavior. Addressing what motivates the behavior is where we make the big shift, the big change. That's where we see the growth. When we address what motivates the behavior, what's driving these actions, we stop running around putting out behavioral fires, little short-term Band-Aids on stuff. Stop jumping, don't touch, don't hit, don't fight. We can direct and demand all day, but then we run out exhausted. You know, we're running out of patience and tolerance because we're addressing behavioral stuff. And what we want to address is something much deeper. It's what's motivating it. We'll talk about that today. The second myth, the fact is that our children already know we're in charge. They absolutely depend and expect us to be in charge. But when we use our anger or our impatience to try to motivate and change behavior, we tell them that we're not in charge. We tell them that they're in charge. We say that you've got me so triggered and wound up that I'm going to rely on you to shift so that I can get better and in control. So unknowingly, out of our own lack of support, which is why I want you to go on those forums, because just being there, you can get support. You know, you don't have to take a parenting class. Just attending 20 minutes today is going to give you such the empowerment, the feeling of empowerment, instead of trying to like willpower your day through it. Willpower yourself through the day, you know, and just try to make it, I can do this, you know, and you're putting all this effort. And I want to shift it. I want you to relax a little bit and feel like you can get support and have, because you need to tell your stories. And kids need to tell their stories, and we need to tell them so that we can show them that we are in charge and let them know that I'm confident. You know, you're hitting, I'm not going to let you hit, but I'm also not going to get triggered. That takes a lot to not get offended and, you know, take things personally. And finally, children learn to be kind, to act appropriately, and to do all these things that we want them to be when they have a secure, reliable connection, attachment with someone in their life who believes in them, in their lives. So that you don't have to teach them to be it. You have to model it. You have to allow them to experience that. providing them with coping tools, not just, we don't, permissive is when we just ignore the behavior. Permissive is not when we address what's motivating it and then provide skills or tools. Excuse me. So those are just a couple of myths that I want to walk away with. I think when we see misbehavior, it's just like what we see on the screen here. We think our kids are doing na 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 na, and trying to get something over us, manipulate, and that's a very adult perspective. And our kids aren't that sophisticated. They're focused on safety, connection, comfort, basic needs is what they're trying to manage. And so that's why everything feels so threatening. And even for older children, when you have teenagers, they go through stages of development that are just as tenuous and difficult and full of anxiety, or anxiety producing, and they have less ability to even manage their emotions at times, or the novelty of something and the desire to be approved of by peers makes them unable to, they don't focus on risk factors, for example. It's a very uneven time for them where they can't necessarily shift or be as flexible. So when we think of behavior, we have to know that it's a communication. It's telling us something about the internal state of our child, about the state of their needs. Doesn't mean you have to fulfill the need. It means you say, I recognize the need. What are some ways, maybe we're saying, what are some ways we can deal with it? I don't want to get ahead of ourselves because we're going to talk about the 3 areas to focus in on so that we can set compassionate limits without getting angry, without getting impatient and intolerant to that behavior that we see. But it's not, na-na-na-na-na-na. Misbehavior is not giving you, the big F you. It's giving you the big, please help me. It's saying, I need help. I'm struggling in this moment. I don't feel connected. I feel agitated. I feel frustrated. I feel incapable. Or I feel, whatever the stressed state is, it's coming from a sense of, I don't have anything to rely on. My resources, I'm in a place where I don't see them. And often when we get stressed, when we feel threatened, we go exactly to that place. We go to fight or flight. And we don't think about it. So I want us to look through a new lens. I want us to see, instead of behavior and conflict and my kids are defying me, I want us to see conflict as an opportunity for growth, because that's what it is. That's why I've named my weekly series Teachable Moments, because every little interaction with your kid is a teachable moment. It's a chance to be, because we can't always be conscious. We all yell, we all break down, we all lose it. But every little moment we have a chance to repair, to reconnect, and the more of those positive moments that we have, that's what's going to support our children. But when that negativity builds up, when those interactions are negative and chronic, it creates a very disruptive cycle in our families, in our relationships. And it's hard to break out of that. We can break out of that, but we have to do it in very small bits. We can't try to, I need my child to change and then it would just be fine. We have to sort of go back and look at where we have to repair. But every moment is an opportunity for growth. So I want us to look through that lens. Experience shapes the brain. And how we treat our children will change and alter and shape and structure how they develop and how things unfold. So just a little bit about me, you guys, before we even go any further. I don't know how, some of you are new to my work, some of you have been with me for a while, but I come to this as, and you might have heard if you watched the video right in the beginning, I know it was a little choppy, but I think the message came through, is that I come from this because I was punished constantly. I was always in my room. I used to have to write things out 1,000 times. My parents did every kind of punishment, from gentle, punitive, logical consequences, logical as we call them, to the more harsh stuff, which is, slapping their kids around in anger, which is a very cultural thing that I experienced and contributed to my sense of feeling unheard, my inability to regulate my emotions. But it's, even if you don't come from a spanking background, many of us did. So when we come to this place, our instinct is not to sit down and talk about feelings and needs. Our instinct is to control the moment, because that feeling of being out of control can become our dominant pattern. So for me, it was a dominant pattern for a long, long time. And my emotional healing brought me to this work. I come to this work as a misunderstood kid. And now I'm a parent, so I have my child's almost 9, she'll be 9 in a couple weeks. And so I know what it's like to be in the trenches and to see it from this perspective now. But my ability to help you is because I can show you what your kids are really trying to say and translate that information for you. So here are the ABCs of conscious parenting. This is sort of how I break it down. I want it to be simple and effective, and this is the 3 areas that I focus on. The A is attachment, attunement, just what I was talking about, being able to go into that place with our kids and want to focus on our relationship. I loved what Ross Green, Dr. Green, is that his name? Excuse me if I'm saying it wrong, Amy, what he was saying yesterday. Krista, I think you keep getting unmuted somehow. You might want to watch your button there. He was saying that that he at one point it became about what's more important, getting my daughter to school on time or our relationship. And so sometimes I always want us to put the relationship first, because that will help you decide whether this is an expectation, whether this is a control move because you're feeling dysregulated. It really helps put into perspective what challenge you're trying to focus on. So attachment, the A. The B is the brain science and the child development, which I'm going to talk about right now, because that's so key. When you guys have toddlers and little ones under, age 6, it's about repetition. It's about going over, not calling from across the room, stop, don't do that, you can't hit. It's about going over and saying, I'm not going to let you hit. Or we can't jump on the couch, so I'm going to take you down. Or, giving them the opportunity to step down. But when they don't, it's not about saying if you don't or counting to 1, 2, 3, because you're working with a child who has a limited brain state to be flexible. Kids can't be flexible when they're that young. It takes a lot of maturity to be flexible. I'm 41 and I'm still chronically inflexible sometimes, so just to give you an idea. It can be really hard. So imagine for kids. But some of us don't realize that. We think, well, they're perfectly walking, talking beings. How can they not just do it? They're looking at me. They're not stressed. We think because kids are standing there all folded and calm, cool, that they're not stressed. But really, they're, that rigid, inflexible state does not have to be explosive. It can be very calm. Well, actually, I had both extremes, but sometimes I shut down. Some kids shut down in their stress state, and that defiance, what we call defiance, is them numbing out to the fear, to the threat that they feel in that moment. So that's the brain science that we'll talk about. And then the last piece, communication, which is what we'll focus on. That's my area of focus. I like to show you how to take the same words even. Sometimes we're not even changing what we're saying, but we're taking the blame, shame, judgment, and guilt out of it. We're taking all of that out and we're saying it with a different intention, because our intention is there, but sometimes our words don't match what our actual intentions are. So those are the 3 areas that I focus on and that we're going to focus on today. So child development, this brain development, really simple. I think, Amy, you posted the triune brain, the hand model earlier, which is a great little video to watch. I just quoted Dan Siegel there in a couple slides back. And I love it because it's so simple. You don't have to know a lot about brain science because it's very complex. And, I'm no expert in the brain science. What I am is I focus on our kids' stages of development and how the brain works. And it's pretty simple, too, when you get down to these basic areas. We have the 3 areas of the brain. The first area is the one that we're born with, the brain stem, right? Our reptilian brain. It's our survival center. It's where the fight, flight, or freeze, that impulse comes in. And that, kids are very reactive. We're born highly reactive, and that's for survival. So when they can get stressed very easily, and they need a co-regulator to help them come down. It's not about you stand over there and you behave, and when you're calm, we can get together. It's about, no, come over here. I see that you're stressed. This isn't working. I can't let you hit. Why don't you sit on my lap? It's about taking the calm tone, and that's what's going to build the brain, because we want to build our kids' brains. So they start reactionary. This is what's developed at birth, and it regulates all those, automatic processes that help us sustain life. And it also is our survival instinct. And then as our kids start to grow, we start to have this developmental focus on the emotional center of the brain. And this is, during 0 to 4, 0 to 5, every kid's different, but that higher brain, that last part that starts to develop, doesn't come online until 5.5. And then it just starts to grow. And so the emotional center is where kids are and that's where toddlerhood and preschool is. That's why they're highly emotional. That's why it's so upsetting not to have the blue cup when you were expecting the blue cup, because to that child, that very small child, it's not about saying, oh, get over it, it's okay, it's not that big of a deal. Because that's perspective. That's you being able to have all these years of experience to know that you can get through it. But for someone who's been on the earth for just, less than 1,000 days, or even, less than 5,000 days, 2,000 days, very young children can't shift that easily. They're very emotional. And this is where we process our experiences. We take things in and then we assess, is this a threat? If it's a threat, we're going to drop down into the survival center. So if we come at our kids from a threatening place because we're unmanaged, we're feeling threatened ourselves, and then we use that, then we shut down any thinking part of their brain that they have developed yet. Because that's what happens to us when we get stressed, when we get overloaded, whether it be from the environment, from our sensory overload, or whether it be emotional. It shuts down the thinking brain, the executive center. This is the prefrontal cortex. This is the part that helps us manage our emotions, regulate and stop our impulses, that impulse control, the ability to see things from another person's perspective, to have that insight and intuition. All of that shuts down when we're stressed. Our ability to be in tune with what we're feeling and to then attune to what somebody else is feeling shuts down. If we're in threat, if we're in fight or flight, if we're parenting from fear, nobody's going to get to that thinking place, that place that handles logic, empathy, compassion. Even when we're logical, we might be in a very stressed state and being very logical with our kids and overly logical, so that what we're doing is we're just sort of spewing stuff to feel in control. But we're not actually making an attuned connection, which is what children need in order to regulate their behaviors, in order to manage and adapt. Because we're very adaptive creatures. But whether we adapt to a state of stress and threat, and whether we adapt to a state of feeling, okay, I can handle this, whether we build resiliency, that really depends on how we remember these events. That's why I was saying the negative memories can build up and create a state of chronic anxiety, overload, trauma, really. A lot of people who didn't have emotionally connected adults to rely on, or even if your parents were very loving, if emotions weren't discussed, if they were neglectful, if they weren't noticing when you were upset, or if they just gave you the, oh, you'll be okay, or just don't talk to those kids, when you're having challenges socially, for example. They didn't do it intentionally, but ignoring those and shutting down that emotion makes it very hard to process as you get older. So we then don't have the coping tools. So we want to make sure that we're giving our kids the steps to build resilience, to be flexible, adaptable, and resilient. And sometimes that starts with us. We have to learn to do that for ourselves. But those are really the three areas of the brain. We have the survival center, we have the emotional brain, which is where the developmental focus is on those early years, which is why kids are so reactive. And then from 6 all the way through our early 20s, and now they're saying the brain just continues to grow and adapt and evolve based on the input, right? It responds to the input. So what patterns are we setting up? Here's the other thing about development really quickly, is that especially with the little ones, I get a lot of the questions that come in say, I've told my child, we have the discussions, I tell them what's expected, to your 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds, and then they do it anyway. It's about repetition. And then there's these periods where kids, brain development is such a sensitive period, and we're learning so much. So even what we know today may continue to evolve into, a deeper understanding of what happens to children and to humans. But we have stages where it's much easier. We have these patterns in development called equilibrium and disequilibrium. And when we're in a state of equilibrium, we're much more cooperative, we're much more easygoing, we feel capable, we can get in control in an easier way. It doesn't mean all conflict is gone, it just means that we're a little bit more flexible in those times, right? So we have approximate ages that this happens. So, at 1 year, kids are in a stage of equilibrium. And then at about 18 months, they shift into this disequilibrium. But so we look at approximate, again, ages, 12 months to age 3, 4. So the year birthdays in the first 5 years or so. And then when we have these stages of disequilibrium, we're a little more anxious, awkward, not so capable, not so emotionally flexible. And this, kids swing back and forth really fast in the first 5 years. So at 18 months, roughly, your child is starting to integrate all of these new skills that they've been picking up. And that requires the brain to do a little bit of reorganizing. So our kids are always spiraling through development and moving away from equilibrium and towards disequilibrium and back and forth and spiraling around. So 18 months, 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, they can tend to be more difficult ages. And then from 5.5 to 6.5, we have sort of a tough stage. This is where we have a big jump in the executive center of the brain. So there's a lot of reorganizing and, massive connections happen in those first couple of years, and then we start to prune it all away. And that's where we really get, the crux of where our thinking brain starts to form. And you'll start to see, what skills do we need? It's not about telling a child, it's about noticing what skills they're missing, or what state of the relationship we're in, or what is the stress that my child is feeling that's overwhelming them. So these stages of equilibrium and disequilibrium are very important to having the patience and the tolerance mostly. You don't need to know a lot about development, except that understand that it is a time that, kids shift back and forth very fast, and sometimes struggle is involved, and sometimes it's not going to feel good for them. And the idea is not for them to feel good, it's about them being supported through the struggle and through that opportunity for growth, right? Through the growth sometimes takes a little bit of pain. It doesn't have to be awful. Like, we don't want everyday parenting to feel awful. But sometimes there's struggle when our kids are growing up because they're learning new skills, or they're learning how to adapt to somebody who is really hurtful, or they're learning how to adapt to social situations, or they're learning their roles in different areas as they start to get older. So there's all different stages and phases of development to consider. So if you have a little one that is defiant, know that, they're supposed to be. That's how they say, where are my boundaries? I'm going to go all the way to the edge, and then I want to make sure you're going to be there to hold me back and to say this is where it is, and not to say this is where it is, you should have known better, but to say, oh, nope, that's not it. I'm going to help you. You made a mistake. And when we can adapt to this neutral, confident tone, our kids are able to then grow from the experience. So I'm going to give you guys, some communication tips that take that thread out, that help you remove the blame, shame, judgment, and guilt, and then help you invite cooperation. That's really my goals for today. But first we have to do, whenever we walk into a situation, we have to decide, what kind of challenge is this? And I like to do a little emergency response assessment. And this is where we pinpoint it to one of 3 areas. And these are the ones that I just mentioned. The first one is skills. Is my child, is this reaction, this behavior, is this a developmentally, is this a developmentally typical response based on their age, stage, perhaps even circumstance? And is it something that requires my child, me to participate with my child in helping them adapt a new skill and build a skill or strengthen a skill? Is my child working on their executive function? So it's not about telling them to do the chores, it's about prompting them what needs to happen next, or where are we stuck, and giving them the tools that they need. So sometimes it's not about, it's never about my child isn't listening, it's about where's my child struggling? Not what can I do to make my child do something, because I don't have tips to control kids. If humans were that easily controlled, somebody would be out there making millions. But it's not. It's about the relationship. It's about what kind of relationship do I want to have. And when we look at these 3 areas, it helps us focus in on that. So skills, do I need to provide skills? Does my child need more skill practice, or is this just an area that they're working on? So before they can master it without my help, without me having to expect them to do it independently, is this where they need my help? And if they're struggling, then they need your help. They're not trying to manipulate you. It's about, I can't handle this. I don't have the resources. So skills, that's the first area we want to look at, or one of the first areas. The next area is stress. Is your child holding stored stress? Is your child naturally disposed to being more anxious just by temperament or by situation? Sometimes we have situational stress where we're going through changes, phases, things that we can't change. We can't change the fact that we're moving to a completely different state, miles and miles away from everybody we've ever known. We can't change that our family unit is dissolving in the way that we've known it and going to be reconfigured. We can't change that school, it has a lot of expectation. So it's not about what happens to us, it's about how do we manage the stress that has to do with it. So when you see your child being rigid and inflexible, ask yourself, and sometimes it's a combination of all three of these areas, right? But is this a stress challenge? Is my child overwhelmed in this moment so that they can't connect to their thinking brain and make any decisions yet right now because we need to regulate? And these are the times when you see the kids are getting aggressive, and aggression is very common in the little kids because it's survival, right? Fight or flight. So it's not, oh, I need to teach my child to be kind. It's, oh, I need to help my child regulate the stress, which is a very different question and problem. And what that does is it creates the long-term solution. I want you guys to have sustainable solutions, not behavioral fires. I'm not going to give you tips and tricks and rewards and stuff like that because it's short-term. And it doesn't create that long-term internal drive to want to cooperate. It says, I'm going to direct and demand, or I'm going to give you things so that you comply. And then, then you got to keep making everything more enticing. Those rewards have to get more exciting. All of that stuff, when we use that, I want you to focus in on these three areas: skills, stress, and finally the third one is the state of the relationship. Often when we come from a more punitive background, when we come from a place of timeouts, when we come from a place of spanking, when we come from a place of using anger and threats more than we use that, I'm going to hold the boundary, not get angry, and sometimes I'm going to maybe need to move things forward. But again, when we're not coming from that place, when we're coming from more of a place of, if you don't, then I will, then we create that disruptive cycle that I was talking about in our families. And it's hard to break out of that dynamic, but it's not impossible. But we have to be willing to recognize that we have to go in and maybe do some repair. And state of the relationship, when we're looking at that, we want to say, is my child saying no and digging in their heels and holding their ground because they feel unheard, because we're not connected, because they feel like I never listen? And some of your kids will tell you, especially the older ones, if they're telling you, you never listen to me, I don't care how much stuff you give them or how compassionate you think you're being, your child feels unheard. And that with my parents tried everything. They did not want to not listen to me. Yes, they probably didn't want to hear my excuses or they didn't realize how important feelings and needs were, but they didn't intend for me to feel unheard. But no matter how much I said, you're not listening to me, it went, you're not behaving. When you behave, I'll listen. And that gives our children not only the power, because they say, we say, oh, it's on you. I can't do that. I got no power here. You make the change, and then we can talk. And all that does is puts kids in a very stressed state where they go, I can't handle this, or screw you for leaving me here. And then and our stuff breaks down. So we want to look at the state of the relationship. We want to say, where have I contributed to this situation? How has my intentions been misread? They were not my intentions, but they were misread. And then do I need to go back and reconnect? So when you see a child slam a door and say, no, I'm not doing whatever it is, first you want to make sure we give some space and time to regulate. But I want to go back and I want to say, you know what? I know that when you slam doors, you're really angry. And that when that you were trying to tell me something, and I wasn't listening in the way that you needed. So here I am. Because I don't like when you slam doors. I don't like when doors are slammed. I don't think you like that place. That's very different than saying to a kid, how dare you? And that's what I got a lot of as a kid. It was the how dare you? And it was a lot of challenge. So this is our emergency response assessment. First, decide what kind of challenge am I trying to solve here? Is it skills? Is it stress? Is it the state of the relationship? My relationship with my child, or the relationship between the siblings, because sometimes relationship stuff builds up with those siblings, and then all of their communications and interactions become conflict because they are holding other stuff that's getting in the way of them being empathetic and cooperative. They're holding on to their sense of privacy, their sense of recognition, whatever it is, and it makes it very difficult to share in the feelings and needs space. So that's why we want to first decide what kind of challenge am I having. Now I want to just walk through really quickly some communication examples, and then we'll get to our Q&A, you guys, because this is what it's really all about right here. We want to shift the way we say things, and we don't always need to shift, like I said, what we're saying. We sometimes just need to shift how we're saying it. So I like to do, I have the TEACH tool, right? It's my 5 steps for peaceful conflict resolution. I'm going to take a drink of water, excuse me, because all that talking got me very dry in my mouth there. This is my 5 steps for conflict resolution. You can find videos about this as well on my YouTube channel. But we want to, step 1 is that, and I do it with the TEACH. I call it the TEACH tool because I like acronyms and things that can help me remember. So T, take a breath. This is where we go from walking in with I need to fix this, I need to judge, I need to change people, I need to do something, to I'm going to take a breath, I'm going to regulate myself, and then I'm going to notice. I'm going to make an observation. I'm not going to run in and say, what are you doing? Or what happened? I'm going to go in and say, looks like you're having some trouble. Or I'm going to go in with curiosity, and I'm going to say, tell me more about what you're thinking. This is a great one when you go in and you know, if it's not a situation where somebody's going to get hurt or something's going to get ruined, instead of going in, getting triggered by what you see, take a moment, be curious. That's the way you connect with your child. It's the way you regulate. You have to take that breath. If your child has a different idea than you, instead of demanding and saying, no, that's not what we're doing, wait to get that. You know, you can impose the limits and you can do it without your children liking it. But the way you get to that place of when you finally maybe have to actually do something for them, that, you know, you can get them there a lot quicker by just shifting the tone that you come in and you just say, it looks like you had a different plan. Looks like you had a different idea. You know, tell me more about your idea. When your child feels like they are heard and that they have a chance to tell you about their idea, they're going to be way more willing to listen to what you have to say. And I know that this can feel like it takes a long time sometimes, because frankly, usually it takes way less time than arguing and shouting for 15 minutes. But it can feel very slow, and being in the moment and slowing ourselves down is very difficult when we're used to being triggered. That's that other issue. You guys got great ideas. If you haven't listened to that webinar recording yesterday of how to shift in that moment, there were some really great ideas. What do I do in that moment when everybody's yelling? And I think Amy, you said, sometimes I just fall down on the floor and drop and make a silly face. Play is an awesome way to diffuse the negative tension. So sometimes you might need to go and take a breath and do something like that before you can get to this place of noticing and observing without judgment. So it's about going in with curiosity and not judgment and demands and blame and shame and all of that, which just sends our kids into the fear place. So we go in and, you know, instead of saying, how dare you speak to me like that, you can say, I can tell by your voice that you're feeling very angry right now. You can set a personal boundary. You can say, I don't like being spoken to like that. Let's take some time. And then you leave. You walk away. With older children, of course, depending on the age of your child. I wouldn't do this necessarily with a 2-year-old because they're in an emotional state. They need you more there to connect. Sometimes kids do want you to stay. But when you need to set a personal boundary, you don't do it by telling people, you change. You say, I don't like how this makes me feel. I don't like what this is doing, so I'm going to take some time. That's how you teach your kids to take time and to wait, to control their impulse to scream and shout and threaten and hurt all the other people, especially their siblings when they have them. So you just say, I can tell by your voice that you're feeling angry. You know, notice what your kids are feeling. You don't seem like yourself today. You know, instead of, why are you acting this way? Or why are you being so, you know, we get so tense and we feel like we have to make sure that our kids are being and doing and, you know, appearing in a certain way. And that just sets us up for a lot of failure and for ourselves, and that judgment from other people on that outside. It's not good for us, and it's not healthy, and it's not helpful for anybody. Sometimes we just want to say to our kids, you know what, I noticed that you're having some difficulty. I'm here if you want to talk. And then we let them have their space. So it's about noticing what's happening. I notice that you've been quiet. I'm wondering what's up. This is what you can do to invite an older child to share. Instead of saying, well, just tell me what's wrong, or trying to advise them, well, don't listen to those girls, or, you know, ignore those guys, and all these, you know, don't worry about them. It doesn't matter. You're better than that. We try to give our kids things to make them feel better. And what I want us to do is help them reflect on how they're feeling so that they can find their own way out of it. That's what we didn't get a lot as children. I didn't get that. I didn't get any chance to reflect on my feelings. I didn't even know my feelings mattered or were there or had anything other than were there to annoy me, frankly. They were just like, ugh. You know, when I was happy, it was good, but when I was mad, it was like, oh, fine, you're mad again. It just felt bad. I didn't know that that feeling was purposeful and that it was going to help me. So these are the words, you know, that help us. If you have two siblings that are constantly bickering, some level of bickering we need to let go. You know, we need to let them work that out. We can't go in and take sides or feel like we have to be protective all the time, because then we set our kids up. We set our kids up to, you know, compete with each other or feel like they need to compete for recognition or acknowledgement. And sometimes that just happens naturally. We definitely don't want to encourage it. But we can go in, and if we hear that things are getting heated up or we see that things are getting violent in any way, can go in and say, I see that you're about to throw something. I absolutely will not let you hurt each other. Okay, I want to know what started this. And then we let each child have an individual time to share their needs, to share their feelings, which is the step 2. After we take a breath and notice and engage, we want to move to step 2, which is to take a breath and notice and observe. We move to step 2, which is engage and empathize. You know what? We say to a little kid, we don't say, don't touch again or you're not getting a turn. We don't threaten. We don't demand or challenge our kids to stay within the boundary, especially little kids. We say, you know, it's hard to wait. Recognize that for that small child who's waiting their turn and keeps touching or can't stand still, it's hard. It's hard to wait. You want a turn so badly. No, I'm going to help you. We go in with this idea of I'm going to help you. We reduce the negative tension. We don't alert their fear sensor to go off and send them spiraling down, or making them think that there's a threat. We let them know, oh, here's a resource. Here's help. That helps us wire up for our potential, for the expansion of our brain, our creativity, our compassion, our ability to regulate. So we say, you know what, when we have kids that keep interrupting, we can say, you know, once we set the limit not to interrupt, and we say, your idea is really important to me. And then maybe ask for contribution. Would you be willing to share it when I'm done on the phone? And then set a boundary. Leave the room to get your quiet. We don't have to say, you're making me, I have to. We say, you know what, I need to change this. This isn't working for me. And we do it confidently, and we do it with a neutral tone as much as possible. That's what's really going to help you shift out of that dynamic, is whenever you can take out the blame, the shame, the judgment, and the guilt, and replace it with just some curiosity, with some neutrality, you'll find that the responses that you get are much more cooperative because kids feel safe. So now when kids are upset, you know, when you're engaging and empathizing, it's not about changing their emotional state. It's about helping them feel it fully. You know, it's okay to be upset. It's sad when we have to leave. I'm not going to let you kick. Kicking hurts. You know, and maybe you have to set down a small child who's kicking, you know what, I'm going to stand over here. You can kick this. And we get, you know, if we're at home, we have a sensory box where we have things that kids can go and use to regulate. We have balls, things they can squeeze. We have Play-Doh where they can go and get it. I used to play tug of war with my daughter because she used to get really stressed and angry, and I would tell her, I want that anger. Instead of telling you, you deal with your anger and shutting her down, I see that anger, give it to me, and we would play tug of war. It was a way to bring play into relieving the tension and helping her regulate. And again, every time we help our kids regulate with words like, this hurts, I'm going to help you, we wire their brains up in the direction that we want them to wire up. We wire up the big part of the thinking brain, and we don't keep them stuck at that lower level, you know, fight or flight response that we're born with, but we want to grow out of. We don't just grow out of it automatically. We need coping tools, and we need people to regulate with us. We need to be able to reflect on our behavior in a safe relationship. That's the best way that your children will have this emotional intelligence that will help them do all those things that we want them to do, like be motivated and have care and concern for other people. So, you know, we don't validate hurting or hitting, but we can say, you know, it feels hurtful when people take things from you. You didn't want to share your toy right now. We validate the experience. We don't have to validate the behavior. We can say, what can we do next? You didn't like that. What can we say? Instead of telling a child, use your words, we tell kids a lot. And then they wait for us to tell because they never get the practice in using their brains. So when we say, you know, it feels hurtful, what would you like to say? Then you give them the chance to calm and to collect their thoughts and practice saying, verbalizing their feelings, emotions, or thoughts. But when it's all heated and we rush and we try to stop the fight and we get all heated ourselves, nobody actually gets a chance to do that. We don't get a chance to practice verbalizing, feeling, connecting. That's all thrown away because we're trying to get everybody in a place where, you know, everybody's happy or at least looking happy and not hurting anyone. We want to make sure that we let our kids know that we hear that things are unfair. It doesn't mean you change your mind, but, you know, when your kid keeps whining or complaining or asking for the same thing, know that that's a good thing. They're motivated to get what they want and to achieve, and that will serve them in the future. And right now you can say, it feels unfair, and you just validate for them. And then if it's too much on you, you go take that personal space that you need to so that you don't become overwhelmed by their emotional needs. Because sometimes we can get overwhelmed emotionally and we can't handle it. So we need to make sure that we can take care of ourselves before we can engage with our kids in that space. So if you feel overwhelmed emotionally, you just take some space for yourself, and you can do that respectfully. It's always about, how am I going to respectfully take care of myself in this situation or protect what needs to be, you know, children. You don't need to protect, I think, emotions. I feel like, you know, I was speaking with a client this morning, and I so felt for her because when you have more than one child, you do feel so deeply for the children, and when you see them hurting each other, you can get very triggered. But know that you can never stop anyone from feeling, and you don't want to deny your children a right to their feelings. You don't want them to feel happy just so you don't have to, or so they don't have to deal with the uncomfortable emotion, because life isn't like that. And when we gloss over the emotions in favor of behavior or in favor of just, you know, making them think that it's okay, trying to talk them into it, we deny them that opportunity to really grow through that struggle. So we say it's normal to feel angry when something like this happens, and we just engage and we empathize. And then once we do that, oops, looks like my battery came undone. Once we do that, you guys, we want to move to this place of, the next step is A, acknowledging needs. So we can say, you know, instead of running in and solving problems for our kids, acknowledge. You know, instead of saying, well, you need to leave your sister alone, or just give her 5 minutes, or why don't you just play with your sister, and we plead and we beg and we try to get rational. No, we need to respond emotionally. We want to acknowledge what's going on for each individual child. You wanted to play with your sister and she said no, and you didn't like it. And it sounds like you're wanting some privacy, that maybe you're feeling a little overwhelmed with all of her asking, and you don't want to do that game right now, or whatever it is. You know, you help them reflect on what is driving their behavior. because then they get good at sharing their needs and feelings. I had the most amazing experience. I had a client tell me a story where she had a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old, or maybe she was almost 10, and her 6-year-old had, her 10-year-old had been working on those, what are they, like beaded things where she beaded this whole long thing with a thread. It was a bracelet. That's what I'm trying to say. My words are sticking in my head. But it was this whole long bracelet with beads and, the thread and twisting it all, and her little sister had come in and undone the entire thing. And previously, the mom had sent me an email, and she said previously it would have been, all hell would have broken loose, and it would have been really harsh, and she would have gotten flipped out and angry. And instead, through this process, through mom being able to use this conflict resolution, her 9-year-old said to the younger one, "I'm really angry about what you did." And then she left, and she didn't say anything else, and she went and calmed herself down in her room. She took time, she got space. And what that did for the younger one was, it was a natural consequence. Look what I did to my sister, who I love and who I was probably just doing this to get her attention because she wasn't paying any attention to me. And I did this, and this is how she reacted. She shared with her sister. And it was such a beautiful story of and then the other one, when they came back together, the younger one had come up with solutions. She offered to help put it back together. So the older one took time to regulate, and the younger one had the ability, because she wasn't threatened, she wasn't feeling scared, but she was feeling genuine remorse because somebody shared what was really going on. And so that was a beautiful moment of, siblings are not always going to be perfectly, conflict-free like that. And they're not always going to know how to resolve it. But have faith that they absolutely can when they are given the model and when they're given that experience. It's amazing to hear the words that come out of my daughter's mouth, now. Whereas when she was very little, she was very intense and highly, highly sensitive, like my whole family. And, it was hard to know that, yeah, this kid's going to learn to regulate, and she's not going to need me to hold her. She's not going to go. My kid used to go from, like, perfectly happy to screaming crazy. There was really no in between. She was either just off or totally content. So it was an intense time where, you have to have a little faith in the process, but to hear her emotional literacy now is amazing. So I just wanted to share that little story with you because it's just such an example of what our kids are capable of. So you guys, these slides will be available with everything, so you can get these communication examples. And actually this whole infographic is available on my website, so you can, if you're just listening to the recording and you're not seeing everything, I'll make sure that everybody gets this list of ideas. So after we acknowledge needs, that's the next part. Acknowledging needs, and then we eventually, when we're feeling regulated, we can move to that connection place, that problem-solving place, where we help kids reflect more deeply. Your friend looks a little bit sad. What do you think we should do? Or what could you do to help? This is very different than saying to a child, well, how do you think your friend is feeling? Right? So we shift how we say it, and it has a totally different meaning for our children. They create a different story around the experience of learning. It becomes something that they are able to reflect instead of feeling judged or blamed or shamed, because shame really will shut off our ability to be vulnerable and to connect. Because when we feel shamed, it's risky. It's a risky proposition to put yourself out there. And shame, I think, is something that have very much dealt with and tried to overcome. It was such a huge part of my upbringing was, shame. How could you do that? What kind of person are you? And that's really what became my message. Oh God, what kind of person am I to do that? And our kids, in their very limited perspective and their all-absorbing sponge about everything we say about them, they truly believe it. They take it literally, and they believe it. So, you're such a pain in the butt, or how you're making me so angry, that becomes their truth. So it's just a shift in tone a lot of the time. When it's a sibling thing, it's not about us coming in and saying, all right, well, you have it for 5 minutes and then you give it to your brother for 5 minutes. It's about being the reflector. Okay, you both want to use the game at the same time. That's quite a dilemma. What do you think we should do? And then you wait for them to brainstorm solutions, for them to come up with ideas. Don't go in and solve stuff for your kids. You know, if your child says, I'm bored, I want to watch TV, and the limit is no TV, it's not, you know, go figure it out, you could do this, and we start naming off all these things to try to make our kids get it, feel it, do it. No, prompt them. Well, it's, you don't like that feeling, what do you think you can do? I used to, when my daughter was going through a difficulty with problem solving around, you know, not wanting, the limit was no TV, and she was like, well, I don't like that limit. I can't think of anything to do. All right, I'm going to help you. Let's put on this timer for 15 minutes. If you can't find anything to do for 15 minutes, I'll come and I'll join you, and I'll help you do that. She, 9 times out of 10, found something to occupy her mind and engage it. She needed to turn it back on. You know, our kids can get sort of unmotivated because they feel so overwhelmed by all the demands from school, from us, from the social expectations. There's a lot that goes into life, and I think modern life is a little more challenging because there's just so much more for our children. So it's not about changing those stresses, but helping them adapt by saying, what's your suggestion for solving this? Or this isn't working for me. Or sometimes it's about setting the actual boundary. Sometimes it's about this last step, which is the help, the H in the teach. Help your child grow. Help your child grow through the moment. It's not about challenging them to do it. You give the toy back or you sit in the timeout, right? That puts your kid in the, oh my God, I can't quite be flexible, but I don't want to go to the timeout, and they get stuck right there. They can't manage that situation. So it's about saying, you know, we have to give the toy back. Would you like to do it on your own, or do you need some help? And then letting the child work that out, you know. When they can muster the ability to change and resolve the issue, how empowered do they feel when you don't have to run over and take things out of their hands or do it for them? You know, I'm going to put the game away so that you're not tempted while you're finishing your homework. Right? Remove the things, and don't do it as, you know, well, you're not finishing your homework, so no more TV, it's coming out of your room. You know, we do that in a way, we think that we're telling kids, well, here's the consequence, and I gave you a warning, so you should have known. But that doesn't feel helpful to children, and if we don't feel like we're connected and being helped, then it's very hard to shift. It's very hard to feel like we can accomplish anything. And when we don't feel like we can accomplish something, we shut down. We don't even attempt to try. We don't look for the resources to help because we're afraid. So it's really always about, how am I moving my child from one state to another, from a state of feeling incapable, unregulated, and how do I help them grow? Do I need to help them with homework by breaking it up really, you know, into small increments? Do I need to step in and say, I'm not going to let you throw that? I feel like you really need to pound something. How about this beanbag over here? And shifting them to a new sensory tool, a positive coping tool. Breathing. Now, sometimes you don't want to start offering all of this in the heat of the moment. Sometimes it's about silence, space, remaining calm. And sometimes it's about, okay, we're ready to move to the next step. It's not about saying, don't feel this way or don't feel that way. It's about, you feel this way. Here's some things that I do when I'm struggling or when I'm worried. I like to take really big, deep breaths, like I'm blowing up a balloon. It's a completely different way, you know, of interacting with our children. All right. That is my 5 steps for conflict resolution. And so now I want to talk about communication. I want to go through, Amy, I don't know if you're back with me, but maybe we can go through some of the questions that came through or some of the examples. And I went through, I was looking at them as they were coming in, and we have a lot of very similar challenges. There were a lot of questions about sibling stuff, and there were a lot of questions about, it seems like a lot of people mostly are working with their triggers and mostly working with trying to stay balanced. And we have to take that step before we can really move to the how do I communicate step. We have to learn to take that moment for ourselves to regulate. And then we want to come in with these different intentions. So on the screen I have a bunch of examples that we can sort of go through based on your questions. Amy, are you with us?
I am.
You are. So do you have, let's see, did people put questions in the chat, or do you have the Facebook opened?
they did. There is room in the chat, but I can also open Facebook. Which would be most helpful to you?
Whatever if you want to read some, I don't want to change screens because I'm gonna, if I pause it, then I'm not unpause it. But if you have some there that you can read, and we can kind of go through them that way. And if if the person is actually on the call, that might be more difficult. But
so
yeah, go ahead. You read them the way.
All right. We'll start with so this one is a little confusing. I'm just going to read it. So this person says, I guess part of their message got cut off, but it said, I guess there had been some trauma in their family, and one of the children has fallen into some very negative pattern of behaving, and this person's challenge lies in with, I'm just going to say her son, who's 21 months old, has picked up on these methods of behaving and acting out, and while in the midst of a meltdown. I'm desperately wanting to love her through this. I'm afraid he's picking up her meltdown methods, banging her head when stressed, self-defeating negative self-talk, thrashing around, hitting herself. How do I allow her to do whatever methods she knows to help her get out the negative feelings and protect my younger son from not picking up those unhealthy habits? I'm at a loss to guide her through this mess of negativity while shielding my younger son.
That's a really tough space to be in, because as a parent we want to be so protective. As a therapist, do you want to start off with this and then I can follow up with some communication stuff? Do you have anything that you want to add to her?
I think that really, I think using your TEACH method, even here, for a young child who's seeing things happen, they're going to want to try out the behaviors that they're seeing their older siblings do, and that's okay. You don't have to be afraid of it. And like Lori was saying earlier, when a child is very young, you're going to want to step in and say, I see you're banging your head. I can't let you hurt yourself. You can bang your head on this pillow instead, or you can I try to encourage people to sort of not hit things because that keeps that negative energy inside. But
yeah, motor memory almost. It's like you get in that pattern.
Yeah, and instead to, like punch the air or do jumping jacks and stuff like that to really kind of let that energy out. Mm-hmm. And with your 21-month-old, I hear that you're afraid he's going to learn negative ways of releasing his anger, but you're still there to help teach him and guide him. And in the same way, with your daughter, who I guess is working through some pretty heavy trauma, when she's not in that moment, really stepping in and having that proactive problem solving with her, I love you and I want to help you work this out and I want to help you get some different ways to work through this. Here are some things I do to release my energies. What of these sounds good to you, or do you have some ideas of ways you can be safe while you're working through this? And then otherwise just really listening to her and letting her be heard.
Did she say how old her older child was?
I don't see it.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. Because if the child's older, could be 5, and that's still not very,
right.
That can be difficult, even more difficult because it's just so young so depending on that age of that child, I think you're so right. She doesn't need to be, it's going to happen. Kids are going to see all kinds of stuff growing up, and we can't, like I said before, we can't really protect them from what they're seeing, but we can be that buffer to the stress. We can be that support, that cushion that makes, that jagged edge that's coming at the child or that they're seeing or experiencing. It can, dull the impact, and it doesn't have to create, the same kind of trauma that we think it's going, that it's going to manifest, it's going to repeat or double, reach our little ones. I think at some point maybe even, protecting your son from needing to see it sometimes. So if you can put him somewhere safely so that you can deal with your other child without feeling like, you know, like you're sending mixed messages over here, am I doing it right? Because, you know, when we judge ourselves as parents, or when we get in that place of, oh, how do I help them both? I can't do it. I can't do it. And then it becomes, we start judging ourselves and that self-talk, and we start questioning what we're doing. And it becomes a very unsettling place. So I think when you can take privacy and space, that's always a great idea. Not worrying about what your child is seeing, but instead using the experience to help him make sense of it. You know, maybe telling story with very little kids. I think telling stories. Oh, it looks like somebody got unmuted here. Hold on. Oh, there we go. Storytelling, I find, is really helpful with little ones, you know, just rocking them, telling them, reaffirming their safety. For your older one, too, because when we go through traumatic experiences and we get into that overwhelmed or meltdown state, and I'm very familiar with rage as a child. I don't know if I mentioned, but when I was 38, I discovered that I grew up with undiagnosed Asperger's. My dad, my cousins, it's like running through our line. And it made such, you know, it took all of the pieces of my life and put a frame around it and said, here's why. And so I'm very familiar and intimately aware of what that meltdown state is, that utter rage. And it's a really, really scary place to be. And so I know that it can really trigger parents into feeling like they should do something. And I think the best thing that you can do for a child, for any of the kids watching or experiencing it, is reduce the threat. You know, get down on the floor, lower yourself, provide space or physical touch when necessary. Every kid responds differently. My kid likes deep pressure, but sometimes needed space where she didn't want anyone to touch her. So it really, you know, following our children's cues, I think, is a great way to nurture those scary moments for them.
I just wanted to add, Lori, I think one thing you said, too, that is worth reiterating is, and when you know your child, you're better able to respond to them and know their needs, and that takes some time, and you're going to mess up, and that's okay. It's part of the process.
Yeah.
But for the children who are really volatile and going through trauma and expressing a lot of rage, that's when it's so important for you to maintain emotional regulation. Yeah. Lots of deep breaths, going to your happy place, you know, whatever it takes to really become emotionally regulated, because that also helps your child become emotionally regulated.
Yeah, because we're you know, our vibe and our energy, it's all mixing. We're picking up on the way we're all reacting, you know, so if my stress response starts going, my child's going to pick up on that. I love the HeartMath Institute for that, because they show the science of how we co-regulate. You know, you can hook two people up to these heart monitors and watch the coherence, and watch the coherence in our own body when we're stressed and when we're not, and see what happens to our brain and how it makes us stupid and disorganized and, you know, rigid and inflexible. And so when we get to that place, for me, I love to, when I'm in those stressed moments, I used to be an actor, so improv was my saving grace for parenting, because I'll sing opera. I will start singing my requests that nobody's listening to. I will do whatever it takes to calm myself in that moment through play. Is a great thing that I've learned that helps reduce it. And I had a client yesterday on one of our last classes for our 8-week series, and she was talking about how her daughter, I think I shared this with you, Amy, but I have to share it because it was so funny. She was talking about how her daughter, her kids were having this sibling stuff, right? So her one daughter, the 7-year-old, comes down and says, no, I'm going to the baseball game and you're not, to her 10-year-old, her older son. So he says, well, no, I'm doing, and he mentioned something that he's not doing. And she's like, what do I say in those moments? I don't even, you know, they're trying to one-up each other, and how do I get through it? And I just said, well, I would have just said, well, I get to clean the house today and nobody does. Just to break the tension, you know, not to make fun of anybody, not to just, but to follow it. And the rule of improv is say yes. You know, yes, and. So for me in that moment, when you're trying to break tension with kids, sometimes just saying yes, agree with them. Yes, this is the most stupid rule I've ever heard of in the entire world. I absolutely agree. You know, it just helps loosen everybody up, because when we're loose, we're not in a state of anxiety. We're not in a state of fighting. you know, to be heard, to be seen, to be recognized, because that's what our kids really want. They're wanting recognition. So when you say, you know, I get to clean the house all day and nobody else does, you're saying, I recognize you. I recognize that you were trying to say something, right? And then you can then go in and approach it differently when people don't feel threatened. Because if we had approached that with, now that's not nice, you know your brother can't make it, or we could come in with all these ways that we think we have to fix and solve it. And I want us to just know that we can navigate the emotions, and then behavior and relationships unravel and resolve themselves in a new way, in a way that's respectful when we stay focused on those different things. So just here's an example up on the screen for whining. You know, if anybody has little ones that whine, and when they don't get what they want, they go into this voice, and we may say things, you know, a really natural thing to say is, you know, stop crying and tell me what you need. We might even plead with our kids. We think that, you know, I gave you some empathy, now do what I need. But it doesn't work that way. Empathy isn't this trick to make our kids do what we want. Empathy is really a connector. It's the path. It's the bridge to getting to the resolution, but it isn't the resolution. It's not the trick or the tip to resolution. It's here's the step. So we might say, you know, please just stop crying and tell me what you need. Or no, I don't want to hear that. Use your big girl words, right? We start demanding, we minimize, I'm right here, there's no reason to whine, and we judge, we blame, and it's unconscious, it's unintentional. We tell kids, you know, use your big girl words. No one's going to want to help you if you're whining or if you're crying. You know, we use a very shame tone. That doesn't create a teachable moment. But what we can go in is what we want to do is follow the teach tool, right? Take a breath. Go in and observe. You'd like me to listen, and you sound very frustrated right now. So you've observed, you've validated the frustration. I'd like to hear you. You know, come sit on my lap. That's attuning. Making a connection, sharing your needs. I would like to hear you. Not I would like you to stop whining so I feel better, so I can handle this. I'd like to hear you. Come sit next to me. Again, that is a step that it's not really about the words in that moment. It's about just what Amy was saying. It's about slowing down the process. Let's try again. Take a deep breath. Right? And then maybe you share the limit. You know, I can help you best when you use those words. Let's try again. It becomes, oh, you made a mistake, or you're having trouble, let's try again. Instead of, do it this way. It's so unpleasant when you don't do it that way. Because, again, it's the message. What message are we sending our children? Are they capable and loved, even when they're not acting in the appropriate ways? We want them to know, even when they're messing up, that you're still capable and you're still loved. And those messages get lost when we come in with the focus, the behavioral focus. So if you have two kids and you have one that's not, you know, that keeps touching the other one, and we say, stop it. I said, leave him alone, right? We make a demand. I want you guys to stop making demands. I want you to start prompting for solutions. You know, we might say, you wouldn't like it if somebody did that to you. Leave him alone. Guilt. No one is going to want to sit next to you if you act like that, right? We use the blame, the shame. What's going to motivate you to change? Is it going to be isolation? Isolation will make someone motivated to change in the moment. Some kids. And some it will make them get even more hysterical. So it just depends. And then we might say, I'm not going to say it again one more time, and you sit by yourself. Right? Now it's up to us. Now we have to go in. We got to manage everything. And we got to do it again, because there was no resolution. It was just demands, punitive threat. So we go in, we notice. Maybe we state the rule the first time. The rule's hands to ourselves. It looks like you're having some trouble. We give the child a chance to feel our connection, to feel our desire to help. So that's what's going to help them regulate. And then we say, notice, you know, what's going on? He's telling you that he doesn't like it when you do that, when you touch him. He's telling you that he doesn't like that. I think maybe that you wanted his attention. Looks like you're trying to tell him about your idea. You know, maybe you make a connection and you try to guess the need. It looks like you wanted his attention. You wanted to tell him something. Now you've validated and acknowledged the need. So that was, you know, the step 2. You've empathized with what was going on. Step 2 and 3. I always say hang out and have a cup of tea, because the first 3 letters are TEA. So you really want to stay there for the majority of the time, because that's sometimes what with little kids or with older kids. Whenever somebody's feeling angry or aggressive, That's where we need to take the time, is with the T, the TEA. He's telling you that he doesn't like that. Now notice what might be going on that might be interrupting your child's ability to regulate. You've been waiting a long time, you've been patient, and you're running out of patience. Or, it's pretty loud in here and he's not listening, and that's frustrating for you. That helps our kids connect their brains. The brain it's an interconnected mechanism. So everything needs to start working in order, and signals get sent and back and forth, and that is a process that takes a really long time, and it's something that kids need practice. They can't just be told. Stop trying to legitimize and rationalize your limits. You're wasting your time. I want you to get connected to what's really going on and set the limits. It's not working. I'm not going to let you do that. And we can do it neutrally and calm. We say hitting was a mistake. Okay, we all make mistakes, so we got to practice taking a deep breath. Do it like you're blowing up a balloon. These are calming exercises that we want to help establish with our kids. Now, we might need to go and do that in a different moment, especially with older kids. We might not get to that resolution part. We might need to have taken some time to regulate, and then we come back and we say, okay, I wasn't acting in a way that I feel good about, and this is what I can do differently. Your kid can come back and say that when they're given that time to process, to feel, gather themselves, to compose themselves within that safe relationship again. So I have more, I pulled these because people had sent me situations. So these disconnecting words and connecting words that are up here, these examples are because people had sent me all of these examples of the sibling stuff, and how do I get my siblings to get along and the fighting, and so that's what these examples are here for. Amy, are there other questions that we should maybe address before we start to wrap up?
There are some more questions. I think you spoke to Natalie's question because she's talking about sibling relationships, and I hope you don't mind this, but I'm going to skip down to this question, which has to do with the No Spank Challenge. Mm-hmm. So Linda asks, what would you tell a parent who believes in spanking in conjunction with explaining why a child is being spanked, quote, out of love, end quote? Any current research on negative consequences of discipline, of punitive discipline, appreciated?
There are resources, I know, specifically for spanking. I know that there are, who is it, Dulce de Leche, her site, Dulce's site. She's got great stuff for that because I think that she comes from just a background where that was, I guess, promoted. So she's got a lot. And Ella Nost, am I saying her name right? Her resources, Little Hearts. She's got great resources for that kind of stuff. For me, you can't give logic to someone who's from that, who's at that perspective, right? It's the same thing that we're going to do with our kids. It's not about telling them why we're right, because no amount of me even telling somebody, even if I give them all the science, if their opinion and their experience is so hardened into one particular perspective, my science is going to mean nothing because they're going to say, well, it worked for me. So I don't like to even try to talk people out of that information. I like to understand and hear their feelings and needs and reflect that. I would, say, what I'm hearing is that you do this or you believe this because you're really concerned about, what are they feeling? What are their needs? Their needs are to have a child who is respectful. And so I think listening to people like that is the best way to move them closer to understanding your perspective, is really just hearing them. And so resources I'm going to leave, I don't have any, I don't have websites off the top of my head. You might, Amy, as far as the science, but I'm sure we can put those links and stuff up on the pages for sure. Because there definitely is more about physical punishment, but even the negative stuff, the negative interactions with our kids. And for me, the reason why it doesn't work is because our kids are having an emotional experience when they're misbehaving, quote unquote misbehaving. They're in a state where they feel like they don't have the resources, or they don't have the connection, or they don't have the skills to manage. So talking at them and explaining why that doesn't really reach them, because we're not addressing, we're addressing the behavior, right? But what was driving the behavior? We're not addressing what was driving the behavior. So that's why it kind of, you have to punishments have to become more intense. You can shut down a kid in fear for so long, and some kids may become really compliant, quietly compliant, and you think they're good kids. For a lot of my childhood, when I got older, I was the quiet, compliant, raging child, raging inside, raging in silence. But I was, got the good grades outside when we were out. I was the good kid. My little sister was the mouth, the one who couldn't control it. And I was the one who was, shutting down. And when I was younger, I was more raging with everybody else. But as I got older, I just withdrew it all. So that's what I would say to that. Amy, what do you have to add?
Sorry, I was typing in some resources too. We have StopSpanking.org. StopSpanking.org has a lot of resources, research on the negative consequences of physical punishment, from depression and anxiety to self-harming behaviors, and obesity, heart disease, cancer. I mean, the research is just overwhelming.
Yeah, because when we can't manage our emotions, our immune system shuts down. So, of course, we're going to get sick.
Yeah, absolutely. And, really, I think, but I totally agree with Lori. Running Parenting Beyond Punishment, people come on there and they want to argue, and they are stuck in, this is what I know, and they're afraid to do something different because it's scary to think.
It's really scary.
I don't want my child to grow up to be, they're afraid their child's going to grow up to go to prison, or to be a brat, or to be entitled, or have no sense of responsibility. And they're not, it's not because they don't love their children. It's because they love their children and they don't have the skills, and they don't know of other resources.
Yeah, and when we come from a family of, when you come from that background of spanking, it's very easy to justify it with the I'm okay. Because, to disrespect our parents, to think that they would have done this knowing that it's hurtful, we kind of can't, we can't make that okay in our brains. So one can't be okay. We have to sort of deny it. And it takes a lot to come to that place of saying, okay, I can see this now differently, but it requires us looking inward. And we're never going to look inward when people are attacking us and saying that we're wrong on either side. We're only going to look inward and reflect on our own beliefs when someone says, I hear you, I understand you, or when someone says, tell me about that experience, tell me what it was like for you as a kid. I like to, parents always say, well, I'm okay now. And I'm like, well, yeah, how were you then? What was going on for you then? Because that's really what I'm concerned with, not how you're going to grow up. Yes, that's going to contribute. How do you manage now? How do you ask other people to change so that you don't get angry? Do you go around blaming others for the way you feel? And I never forget, I had a friend who, she started couples therapy with her husband at one point, and she came out of it going, I can't believe my parents conditioned me to be this way in so many ways, and I didn't know. For her, it was such a realization that she was acting unconsciously, on automatic pilot, and would fiercely defend any defensive attitudes that she felt attacked by people. She would defend her position. She was not giving in. It was not her fault. And then she came through this when she finally had someone hearing her in that experience of really being listened to. She was able to move from that place. So aside from the resources, which, yes, of course, StopSpanking.org, they would, of course, have things like that. I think it's really about listening to people in that space, for sure.
Do you want me to read another, or it's about 2:30?
Right.
I don't know.
Let's take one more.
Okay.
I know that we can't get to everybody's questions. I was hoping, though, that through the different slides and things that we've had up here that you guys have gotten a new sense of how to approach the challenge, because I'm not the expert on your family, you are. I want to give you the transformational language, but I can't be in your home. I don't know your kids. I don't know their personalities and their temperaments. And when it's sibling stuff, sometimes it's kids reacting to the fact that the new one is just newly there. Sometimes it's I'm holding on to stuff because she gets treated differently than I do. There's so many dynamics. So hopefully people are getting a way to apply this directly to their family, even if we didn't get to your individual question. But let's take one more so that we can kind of work through it.
I just want to mention, since you mentioned that sometimes understanding our children's temperament is exactly what we need, because when their temperament is different from ours, it just makes it so much harder.
Yeah.
So if you're interested in learning about your kid's temperament and how it's different from yours, that's what we're going to be talking about on Thursday. So
Perfect. Yep.
Come join us. It's going to be great. Okay, sorry.
No, sorry. Awesome stuff.
So Natalie, wait. Let me scroll up. Sorry, I missed it.
That's okay.
Natalie says she has two questions, a personal one and a professional one. She says, first, her middle daughter is a person who reacts to someone being upset by acting silly. Obviously, this is because she's uncomfortable with those feelings. How can I help her respond in a way that allows her to hear what the hurt person needs from her? Please don't sit on me. Please don't yell in my ear, things like that. Her middle daughter just turned 3. She has a 5-year-old, older 5-year-old sister and a younger 1-year-old sister who are struggling with her ignoring their needs.
Okay, wait, I got a little confused there. So the 3-year-old is the one that's having the challenge?
Right. She's uncomfortable, so she's acting silly whenever her siblings are trying to set limits with her.
Trying to set limits with her? Does she give an example?
Like she did.
Oh, when they say don't touch me or that kind of thing?
Right.
Okay. So do you want me to go first, or do you have anything you want to share?
You go. It sounds like you have an idea.
Well, when she said when she said her age, it shifts immediately the kind of response that I'm going to give, because a 3-year-old doesn't really have the skills to manage that situation on their own, right? So it's not how can I help her respond differently, because that's almost like how do I make her respond differently to them? It's how can I support her through this discomfort? And sometimes you may need to, set the boundary physically, right, by walking over and not letting her touch. I heard your sister say, don't touch me, so I can't let you do that. And then, where do we need to go? We then figure out what's the next step to that solution. Do we need to stay and cuddle? Do you need to go get some space? That's all individual and depending on the situation, of course. But I think wanting her to be or see it differently isn't going to happen just yet, because a 3-year-old doesn't have that ability to see it from somebody else's perspective. And they don't have, that ability to say, to notice in the ways that I think we're hoping. That will come with time, but it comes with experiencing and not being told. So I think in those moments it's just setting the boundaries kindly as you need to, and not expecting a child to change, but setting it up for them to be able to change. And that requires, stepping in, making an observation, naming what you see. Is it a cry for it? At that point, is it about attention? Is it that she wants to be noticed? Is it that she doesn't like what's happening? We're all leaving and she's stressed by the fast movement of everything going on, and she's taking it out on the the other two. So what's really driving that behavior in the moment? I can see that you're, that you don't want to leave. Address the need, the feeling, and then it leads you to that next place. But I don't think we can ever make our kids feel differently, or we can only encourage them to feel their feelings. And when they feel their feelings and know that they are respected for having, that they're not disrespected because they feel angry, that it's okay to feel that, or it's okay to feel uncomfortable, and I'm going to help you set these limits. I'm going to bring you to another room so that you're not yelling in someone's ear. Or I'm going to tell, I'm going to set it up with the older kid, with the other kids. You don't like when your sister does that. She's having some trouble stopping her, and I've got my hands in the chicken. I can't come over. What can you do? And you ask the 5-year-old, and the 5-year-old can then, because the 5-year-old might stand there and wait for you to fix it, right? But if you prompt her, you don't like that, what can you do? She can think for her, because she's prompted to think instead of sort of being stuck in that, I don't like this feeling, what do I do? Oh, I can move. Or I can, and if maybe she says, I need your help. And you say, you can do this. I have faith in you. Letting our kids know that we have faith in them. Sometimes walking into a situation, reflecting what we see for the children, you're frustrated because you can't hear the TV because he's playing this right now. Whatever the situation is, reflecting it for them, and then letting them know that you have faith that you're gonna work it out. I'm gonna go back to what I'm doing, but I'll be listening. But I think you guys can work this out. Completely different, because then it says to our kids, one, I have faith in you, and one, I'm gonna ask you to take some responsibility here. If I hear that it gets, out of hand, yeah, you're gonna come step back in. But you want to come in not as a mediator, trying to make everybody happy and feel good, but really come in and, if you have to be protective and separate them, that's obviously something that you have to do. But that ability to not feel discomfort or to not be agitated by what's going on, that comes with maturity, emotional regulation. That ability to tolerate things really just comes from, what are the needs in that moment? Does she have sensory needs? Is she overwhelmed by it? That's what I was saying. What's the experience that's causing it? Is it a relationship thing? Is it a sensory thing? I'm stressed by the environment. I'm overwhelmed by my senses. Or is it just I'm lacking the skills to shift? And that's how we know which way to go in. Am I going in and offering something to squeeze because she's feeling really frustrated and this will help her ease that discomfort? Or am I going to go in and be the reflector so that my children can speak about their feelings? And, even a 3-year-old or a 3.5-year-old or a 2.5-year-old, they can say, I'm mad. It doesn't have to be a whole conversation. It can just be, and it's that reflecting, and it's doing it over and over. It's not just doing it once and then thinking, oh, they should have handled it by now because we've practiced already. It's really a sort of a lifelong thing that we're always managing conversations and interactions and relationships, right? It's always a constant, a delicate balance of how do I respect your needs? How do I share my needs? I don't think with any relationship it gets necessarily, that it's perfect or that it ever gets done in a certain way.
I agree, Lori. I think you're spot on.
I've had a lot of fun, Amy. I feel like we should wrap this up. I don't want to overwhelm people. 90 minutes, our brains start to shut down. That's what I always tell my classes. After a while, we need to take time and absorb it all. We will continue this conversation, though. Like Amy said, join us on the No Spank Challenge Facebook group if you're not on there. It's if you weren't able to post your question, it's probably because you weren't a member of the actual group when I sent out those links. So get on that group. We can continue the discussion there. Obviously, everybody knows where to find me, teachthroughlove.com, or on Facebook, Teach Through Love. I have a communication class that's starting up in a couple of weeks. So if you want more help on that, you can always join me there. It's a live group class. I'd love to have you guys. But I'm excited for the rest of your webinars this month. So let's remind everybody what we have next. It's on Monday, Amy?
Sorry. It's, well, for a whole week, we're going to be talking about the effects of brain on behavior, just a lot of like what you were talking about. That's going to be the discussion. There'll be research articles and stuff. And then on Thursday, we're actually going to be talking about understanding how children think and feel, and that's going to include things about their temperaments, because a lot of that has to do with how they're thinking and feeling.
Awesome. That's going to be a good one. I think when we can start to delve in and get intimately involved with the emotional world of young children, it not only helps us understand them, but it really helps us reparent ourselves in ways that we might need. I think that's the big gift there. So you guys definitely look out for that. Amy said it's on Thursday, but we're on the forums all week. Come join us there. Come share your experiences. Find me on YouTube, on the website. You can find Amy at parentingbeyondpunishment.com. She is the gracious and amazing host of this entire month-long challenge. So make sure you're on that list too, the No Spank list, so that you get all the information emailed to you. All right, you guys. Amy, thank you so much. I'm sorry we couldn't see you today. We practiced it yesterday too, and it was all working. And
I know, and I couldn't figure it out. I got so interested in what you were saying, I just didn't even bother looking. So I was like, forget it. I'm gonna take notes.
That's okay. It was awesome. I love doing these events. I hope that we get to do more together.
Me too. Thanks so much for having me.
You guys, we'll see you, Amy, and everyone will see you on Thursday. We'll see you on the forums. So take care. Have a great afternoon.